Hi, thanks for joining us. This morning I'm sitting down with Dr. John Coyne, Head of ASPE's Border Security Program, and Amelia Meurant, a research intern here at ASPE. Congratulations, guys. You've just released your latest special report.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
This is a big project, and from my understanding, it involved, numerous interviews with lots of people across law enforcement. Can you tell me more about that process, John?
Yeah, look, it was a really exciting project in the sense that, we work with a range of people this time around. So it was, to be quite frank, it wouldn't have been possible without the support of Oracle, and in terms of their interest in, trying to contribute to innovation here in Australia in law enforcement. And then the actual methodology. So we did 50 interviews with about 150 participants. We ranged from vendors through to government departments, the operational ones, strategic and policy, right through to the finance sector. So it was a really interesting project. What we also found with that is that the willingness to contribute to innovation was really quite astounding. So, we were never short of answers. There were people who were willingly providing across the private sector, public sector, wanting to be part of this process and to put their best foot forward. We also found, within areas like the CIOs, or Chief Information Officers, and Chief Technological Officers, we found this real interest in how do we move forward. So it was a really pleasing piece of research to do, because it wasn't a matter of trying to force people to give us information. It was about how do we process and do justice to such a large quantity of really great ethnographic information.
What motivated you really to write on this topic?
Look, it starts with a conversation at Interpol World. So last year we were sitting in Singapore. I caught up with a number of private sector vendors, and they were talking and lamenting on wanting to make a contribution to innovation in law enforcement. So after that I went back and sort of had a bit of a think about it. And realistically, over the last sort of couple of years, so about the last 5 or so years, anti-money laundering has become the sort of front end of innovation in law enforcement, and it's been the latest strategy to defeat organised crime and terrorism. So I thought, what better place to start? And on top of that, it's an interesting place because it involves vendors, multiple departments in Home Affairs, as well as the finance sector. So it became this really perfect test site for doing a case study.
Yeah, perfect. So Amelia, I'll direct my next question to you. So what were some of the key factors that you guys found that support and restrict technological innovation within Australian law enforcement, and specifically, with their AML efforts?
So in regards to looking at the challenges first, our report identifies 3 main areas in innovation focus, innovation culture, and innovation integration. So regarding innovation focus, there's a tendency for law enforcement agencies to kind of misconstrue finance processes and budget austerity, which leads to the prioritisation of putting forward proposals that are really exhaustive without focusing more on broader problem definition, which means that they're often quite short-sighted. And then in regards to innovation cultures, these short-sighted projects have the tendency to become ingrained as long-term legacy projects without really mapping out long-term strategies for ongoing innovation. And in regards to the third point, which is on innovation integration, there's a tendency for law enforcement innovation agendas to occur more as a cottage industry rather than having an overarching agenda. And then to talk about platforms for integration and existing capacities. Despite these fractures, we do see a genuine commitment across law enforcement agencies for developing multidisciplinary teams and establishing those connections. And I think it's a right moment now, given the recommendations of our report, to implement that, which I'll leave for John.
Yeah, so that segues perfectly into my next question. What are some of the key recommendations of your report, John?
Look, it would have been, and I would say, it would have been really easy for us to make recommendations around specific things to do, i.e., you should look at this technology or that technology. And we did get a list of sort of the sorts of technology needs that departments in this area needed. But what we really concentrated on was providing those recommendations that would create an infrastructure, an ecosystem that would engage with the fact that the innovation they're trying to seek in AML and broadly in law enforcement is an ongoing process. So it's not necessarily a destination. So our recommendations weren't about getting people to somewhere. They were about building the facility for the journey. So, the vehicle for the journey. So in that case, what we talked a lot about was making recommendations around establishing people responsible in each department for innovation. So a leader, innovation lead who had an accountability for making innovation work. We talked about creating communities of practice, bringing people together who were innovators. So not necessarily, they had innovator in their name, but people who had a gift within their normal work environment to looking for new ways to do things. And then we also looked at making recommendations that could make full use of Home Affairs. Now, there can be no doubts, Maddie, that Home Affairs has been a really controversial announcement across the board. It's been criticised on a number of fronts, but one particular area where it can make a big difference is here, where it can draw up the responsibilities for managing the innovation process, for creating innovation, an innovation culture, or at least be focused on creating an innovation culture at a whole of government level. Now, that might seem a little bit like creating bureaucracy, but what it really does is it creates economies of scale. We've got to remember that the departments we're talking about are very small comparatively in government. So what we're talking about here, accumulatively Home Affairs is large, but AFP is not a big organisation. ACIC, that's in the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, very small agency. AUSTRAC could almost be described as a micro agency. So what we're really seeing is about building this sort of critical mass and an economy of scale for innovation that then sets the priorities, and not in an authoritarian way, but in the sense that, we have a limited budget. We wouldn't describe it as we're in a period of fiscal austerity, but we have a limited budget. Where can we get the biggest bang into the medium and long term for that? And I think the recommendations we make are about creating that future position.
Thanks so much for that, John. My next question I'm going to direct to Amelia. You touched on this a little bit, John, but I'm interested in knowing more about some of the broader implications for other law enforcement agencies from the findings of your report.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the report is looking at establishing those architecture for co-design and cooperation in regards to money laundering space, but it can be applied across the board, across a lot of different operations in law enforcement. By establishing these platforms and architectures for close collaboration with the private sector, and in this case we were focusing as well as on the financial sector, we can see a lot of broader insight shared amongst different agencies, as well as really responding quickly to the adaptations that are being made within the private sector space and those innovations that are occurring potentially at a faster pace than within law enforcement agencies themselves.
Well, thank you again, John and Amelia, for sitting down with me this morning.
Thanks, Maddie, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And congratulations again also. For listeners who are interested in reading this report, you can click on the link below. And also you can follow us on Twitter @ASPI_org. Thanks.